The Portfolio Composer, episode 215.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach, Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of The Portfolio Composer.
I have always felt like you make good work that you believe in and that you think is good, and then it will find its audience, hopefully. And that's kind of what I've always gone by. I have never changed the actual content or quality or bent of what it is that I'm doing, hoping to get a bigger audience or to please more people. I don't believe in doing that. I go the other way. It's like, I am completely willing to bend over backward to spin it a certain way in what's written about it to interest different people in it. But the art itself, I am not touching.
This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the music notation software from Steinberg. Just released, Dorico Pro 2 is a major new version, including features for musicians working in film and TV music and in jazz, rock, and pop. Steinberg have also released Dorico Elements, a new entry-level application that packs all of the essential power of Dorico Pro into a simple, streamlined package that is ideal for those getting started. Find out more later in the show. Hello, and welcome to episode 215 of the Portfolio Composer podcast. I am your host, your coach, and your teacher, Garrett Hope. This last spring, I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to travel to San Francisco to be a part of a friend's retirement party. And while I was there, I took full advantage to explore the city and to meet with an amazing composer, Pamela Z, who I'm so excited to introduce you to today. She is an icon in the new music community and is a pure inspiration for those of us who are still building our careers. I hope you enjoy this interview so much and get a lot out of it. Pamela Z is a composer and performer and media artist who makes solo works combining a wide range of vocal techniques with electronic processing, samples, gesture-activated MIDI controllers, and video. She has toured extensively throughout the US, Europe, and Japan. Her work has been presented at venues and exhibitions including Bang on a Can, the Japan Interleague Festival, Other Minds, the Venice Biennial, and the Dakar Biennial. She created installations and has composed scores for dance, film, and chamber ensembles, including the Kronos Quartet. Her awards include the Rome Prize, a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Doris Duke Artist Impact Award, the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation Residency, the Herb Alpert Award, and an Ars Electronica Honorable Mention, and the NEA Japan US Fellowship. You can find out more at PamelaZ.com. For those people listening, Pamela has been so gracious to invite me into her studio, which is also your living space, right?
Indeed it is.
Yep. In the absolutely incredible San Francisco. And so thank you for your generosity in meeting with me today. But you are a Colorado native, as am I.
Well, I actually was born in upstate New York. I was born in Buffalo.
Really? So when did you go to Colorado?
But I was quite young. I was a child when my parents split up and my mother moved us to Colorado. So I lived my childhood and most of my childhood and my youth were spent in the Denver metro area, and not far from your Arvada home. I was in Denver proper and then in Westminster.
Oh,
and
sure.
So
this is like a mile away.
I went to Ranham.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Ranham High, and my sisters went to North. And then I went on to go to music school at CU Boulder. And then in the mid-'80s, I moved to San Francisco. So
okay.
I have been in San Francisco so long that, some people say I can consider myself an honorary San Francisco native, but I was not born here.
Sure. Let's go back to Colorado, though, because you were a voice major, right? Studying opera performance?
Well, I was actually a voice major, but I had a education component to my degree because my parents were those type that say, you have to have something to fall back on, which, was ridiculous because it was like I had no intentions of being a music teacher. I just was going to be a musician. And so, but I still think it was a pretty enriching education to include all those components. And so, yeah, but I studied classical voice, and my vocal teacher, who is still a friend, a dear old friend, and he and his wife, who now live in Southern California. His name was John Payton, and his wife is Joan Thompson, and she's a pianist and he's a tenor, and he's also famously the editor of those 25 Italian songs and arias.
Oh, really? That every vocal major
has to sing. So everybody sang, I think, Caro Mio Bene out of there and a bunch of others, but or maybe that wasn't in there, but something like that. Anyways, so that's him, John Payton, and he was my teacher, and he remains a lifelong friend, and just somebody who's been super supportive of my work and what I do. And I remember when I was in school, he was the only person on the vocal faculty who would even allow their students to sing anything other than bel canto.
Really?
Like some of those teachers were like, if you sing, they wouldn't even let their students sing show tunes. They were like, you're going to ruin your voice if you do anything other than,
let alone Sprechstimme or something like that.
And my teacher he wasn't a big fan of new music, but he was very open to that people should use everything they have. And he said, if you can sing high, you should also sing low. If you can sing with one technique, you should also try other techniques. And it's good for you to be stretching out. And he was really the only one who felt that way. And so I didn't get kicked out of his studio for the fact that I was singing opera arias and art song by day, and that night I was playing in clubs and singing, songs that I had written and cover tunes and so on and so forth. I didn't, there were some teachers on the faculty who, if they had discovered that, I would no longer be their student.
It's so sad. So many of these interviews have similar stories where, like, secretly they're doing this stuff on the side.
Right, exactly.
So as a student, you were already composing? Would you have said composing or just songwriting
at that time, I called it songwriting, and that's basically what it was. When I was a music student, I had a very strange kind of like division between, so I was singing all this classical music, opera arias, art song, all of that kind of stuff. And then I was writing songs and learning songs by sort of singer-songwriters and sort of in the almost folk rock genre, and then later kind of new wave and punky kind of stuff. And I couldn't reconcile those two things. Like, I loved both and I couldn't figure out. And then what happened was, after I got out of school, after I graduated from university, I stayed in Boulder for several more years. And I was doing radio at KGNU in Boulder. I had a radio program called the Tuesday Afternoon Sound Alternative. And on that program, I really feel like that is kind of where I got my experimental music education. Because I would just comb the stacks, and there was just rows and rows of vinyl records, and I was finding all these CRI recordings. I don't know if you remember that label, Composer Recordings Incorporated.
Yes, yeah.
Is it Incorporated? Anyway, CRI. And there were all these composers on there. There was a label called 1750 Arch Street, which incidentally is the physical address of what is now SINMAT in Berkeley, Center for New Music and Technology.
Oh, across the bay.
Over on it's in Berkeley on Art Street.
Okay.
And but before SINMAT was officially SINMAT, it was the home of this record label called 1750 Arch Street, which was the address. It still is the address. And that label had a lot of really interesting compilations of people like Charles Amerkanian and Laurie Anderson and John Giorno doing like text sound poetry and composers like Pauline Oliveras and just all kinds of really interesting people. And I was discovering those people, and I was discovering lovely records and recordings of Alvin Lucier and all of these things. And I was doing a radio show where I would combine in one program. So my show was from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., at which point I had to put All Things Considered on. And then, and in those days it was funny. It was like everything was, and like we had these, 2-track reel-to-reel tape decks in the production studio. And the reels held a half an hour of sound. So you had 2 side by side. And at 3 o'clock, I had to go in and put the first reel on and put it on record, because coming down the pike from Washington was the first half hour of All Things Considered. We would record that to analog tape on an open reel half-track machine.
Oh my.
And then when it got to be 3:30, I would go in and put a tape on the second machine, start it recording, take the tape from the first machine, walk it into the air studio, put it on the deck, and cue it up so that at 4 I could start playing the first half hour of All Things Considered.
Yeah.
And so that was how we did it in those days.
Wow. So was your
crazy.
show live, or were you pre-taping it?
Oh, my show was live, and I was just on the air spinning vinyl and talking. And so I would basically play, I would just curate a program of experimental music, new music, but I would program I would just play I'd segue from Varese to the Ramones, and then to
that's amazing.
Stockhausen, and then Laurie Anderson, and then, some weird,
Brian Eno or something.
yeah, Eno or Frank Zappa or the Slits or, and it's and so my program was just I usually kept it to fairly short pieces so that I could play a lot of them and segue from one to the other. One time I played Alvin Lucier's I Am Sitting in a Room.
The whole thing.
But what I did was I just put it on one of the turntables, and then I would just visit it every once in a while. So I started the show with it, and then I potted down a little bit and announced what was going to play, and then I segued into the next thing, but I let it keep going. And then every once in a while I would just bring it back in, and it was more reverberant,
Yeah.
And I just did it that way because I knew I couldn't get away with playing the whole piece on my show at that time, I don't think. But I did it that way, and I did things like that. But it was from doing that show that I got exposure to a lot of work, very experimental work and adventurous work, and also got a taste for mixing these things up and combining them in ways and I started hearing people who were doing extended vocal techniques and more experimental sound, or just composers like Barrio, who's using electronics and then using Kathy Barbarian's voice, and it was through that I began to, and then also at the same time that I was doing that, towards the end of my time in Boulder, I got a hold of a digital delay, and I started processing my voice. And the way that I started composing and thinking about sound and thinking about music just changed overnight with that, because I became really enamored of this idea of repetition, of the idea of layers, of slowly changing things. That I was listening to a lot of Philip Glass, and I actually had Philip Glass on my show. I was so excited because at that time he had put out this record called Glassworks, which was a solo piano record, and he was touring. I think he maybe had a concert at Mackey Auditorium or something, and he came on my show and to be interviewed, and I was just so excited. And then the new music director of the radio station was very concerned that he felt that he was the most qualified to interview Philip Glass. So he made me just run the board. So I just sat there around the board while he.
It was your show.
It was. But anyway, but those were the days, and I just feel like that it was people like Philip Glass and Steve Reich and all these new music composers who were sort of in the quote unquote minimalist school of music, kind of gave me permission to really think about stretching out the way that I looked at sound. And I really feel like overnight, my way of making work changed. Also, I found that this was a place where I could marry all these different vocal styles. Because, before I started working with more experimental stuff, I had the classical people saying, oh, you need to sing this kind of music. And the non-classical people were always saying to me, oh, your voice sounds too trained, da-da-da. And so I was always wanting to try to slip opera arias somehow into this other music I was doing. I couldn't figure out how to do it. And then all of a sudden, this whole new music world opened it up for me that you can combine all of these things and you can pull from all of them. And you can use, a very bel canto tone, and then you can switch to a non-vibrato or airy or breathy or harsh or bright timbre or whatever you want, and all in the same piece if you want, And that is when I really felt like I found my place in music and what I wanted to do and what worked for me. So, yeah.
So I'm a little fascinated that, because from my perspective, and tell me if I'm wrong, there's this real disconnect then from what was happening in the vocal studios and probably what was happening in the composition studios.
Yes. Oh, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it wasn't until my senior year at CU when I discovered that all the interesting people were in the composition department. And so what happened was you had to do an ensemble. Mm-hmm. And you know how music school is. It's you needed to do like 21 credit hours just to get through in 4 years.
Right.
And
yep.
But you had to take some ensemble. And so when I was doing like concert choir, it had 4 rehearsals a week. They gave us 1 credit hour for that.
Oh, still that way.
And it was like, oh my God. And so finally, like in the last year, I was like, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to join Collegium Musicum instead of the concert choir. So I started singing with Collegium Musicum, and lo and behold,
tell people what that is.
Oh, so Collegium Musicum is kind of the early music ensemble. Right. And so the interesting thing that I didn't know at that time is that there's a lot of like really good blood between early music and new music people.
Because that's not bel canto.
It's like people like early music, new music people love early music, and early music people like new music. And it's like there's this strange, like everything in between is boring to them. And so when I joined Collegium Musicum, I met all these really interesting people. And like the lute player was a composition major. Mm-hmm. And I found all the interesting people were composition majors. And there was this guy on the faculty named Tunzing who had a Moog synthesizer lab in the basement of the music school.
Which was kind of rare at that
time.
That
I didn't even really know about until I met these people in the Collegium Musicum who were like, oh yeah, we're working in the Moog lab. And I'm like, the Moog lab? So that was, I better stop
get
jostling.
Some mic sounds.
You're going to get like some mic sounds here. Sorry, I'm
That's
jostling too much. But yeah, so in that last year, I sort of like have made this connection with all of these composition majors. And there were some interesting composers on the faculty, and they, these guys were studying with them. And I was like, oh. So I really didn't think of myself as a composer. I mean, I thought of myself as a songwriter, which is kind of the same thing. But, then I got out of school and I started doing radio, and I started discovering working with voice and electronics and all of that. And that's where I really kind of got my feet wet with more experimental music.
And you got the delay machine.
And yes. And that's, that sort of led me to being able to think about layers and patterns and repetition and timbre and texture and all these other elements of music beyond melody, rhythm, and harmony, that we mostly think about.
So when did you make that mental shift from songwriter to I am a composer?
I think, I think that sort of happened after I got the delay, and then I started buying a bunch of more delays and started doing, and I think the other thing I connected with at that time was that to me, the most interesting people in music were people who were coming out of the fine arts world. Mm-hmm. And so even all the talking heads were, art majors. Yep. Laurie Anderson was an art major. All these people went to art school instead of music school, or in addition to, and Brian Eno and all these people. And so I think that it was a very weird shift for me. Like, it was kind of immediate, the shift. Like, this all happened in 83, 84. And in 84, I moved to San Francisco. But I started playing with machines, layering and my voice, and also with a 4-track. We had those little cassette 4-tracks, the Porta Studio.
Tascam or something?
Yeah, Tascam made the Porta Studio. Mine was actually a Yamaha one, but it was the same idea, with a cassette that instead of having 2 sides of stereo, you have four tracks in one direction, and it runs at 15 IPS or.
I can't remember.
It runs. I think it ran. Maybe it ran at the same speed as a regular cassette. Maybe it didn't run at 15, but it ran. But it used all 4 going in one direction and had heads that you could activate so that you could record and play back. Mm-hmm. And it was basically a multi-track studio in one little box, one little machine. And so I was making works, like kind of my ambient works with long delay tones of my voice, and then spoken text and things like that, and playing with all of that. And I can't remember where I was going with this, or what you just asked me something. And
well, it's all right. I kind of want to go in a different direction anyway. So you moved to San Francisco, and this is where Pauline Olivieros was. So did you get to interact with her?
It's funny. Pauline was teaching at Mills, and she was sharing up her post. There's this chair at Mills called the Mio chair. And she and Alvin Curran shared that chair.
Okay.
Shared that chair. And so she would do it one semester, he would do it the other semester.
Wow.
And so that's when I met her and Alvin. But interestingly enough, I got to know her better when I started going to New York a lot, because the other part of the year when she wasn't in San Francisco teaching at Mills, she was in New York. And then Alvin, I also, but I got really close to a lot of those people at Mills, and they became friends and colleagues. I never taught there, and I was never on the faculty there, and I never studied there, but I spent a lot of time going to concerts there, and they invited me to play concerts there, and I just was good friends with a lot of people there. But yeah, that was part of the wonderful world that I stepped into by coming to the Bay Area.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so you come to San Francisco, and you are, in your mind, a composer, and you come here. Why? Why San Francisco?
Because I knew that I belonged here. So I had an interesting history with San Francisco. In the late 70s, early 80s, I was coming here it's so weird how fast this happened. I was still in the 12-string guitar busking stage. And I came to San Francisco 78, 79. I was coming here with guitar and busking, playing in Fisherman's Wharf. The first time I came was because I was busking on the Pearl Street Mall, and some people walked up to me. This probably was in 1978. People walked up to me, put a tip in my case, and wrapped in a note. And I read the note, and it said, "We love you. If you ever come to the San Francisco Bay Area, you can stay with us in Berkeley." And so I was like, oh. So then that winter break, my senior year at CU, I packed up my stuff and got on a plane and went to San Francisco, and I stayed with these people in their house in Berkeley, and was in the Bay Area for 2 weeks. And I was just going down to, at first I was just going to Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley and busking, and then I was going into San Francisco on the newly opened BART system.
Oh, okay.
It was like a year old or 2 years old at that time. And taking those trains into San Francisco, and then going to Powell Street, and then going to Fisherman's Wharf, and making like a buttload of money playing,
really,
Joni Mitchell songs.
Oh, sure.
And on the wharf and singing my guitar. I mean, I was making as much money in 1 hour of playing on the street in San Francisco that I would make working for a whole week otherwise, And
wow.
So I had fun doing that, but the first time I was here, I really spent almost the entire time in the touristy part because I was doing that. So I was staying at these people's house in Berkeley. I would walk down the hill to Telegraph Avenue and play there, and then I would get on a BART train, and I'd come out in San Francisco and play like on Powell Street near the cable car turnaround, or I would take a bus down to Fisherman's Wharf and play down on Fisherman's Wharf. And
I was down at Fisherman's Wharf just like yesterday, and
it is,
every like 50 feet there's a new busker or street performer or something.
And so I did that, and then I came back, and I was like, that was fun. So I did it again a couple more times. I came in the summer, and I met some good friends and had a lot of fun. And when I came back, I drove my hippie bus. I had a Volkswagen microbus, and I came out my hippie bus, and I spent a month of the summer in San Francisco. And at that time, you could just park your little van right on the wharf at night and sleep. And then you'd get up in the morning and you'd busk. And I did that. And again, it was spending almost the entire time in the tourist part. And then I made some friends with some interesting people. And they took me to some cafes like in North Beach, and where there was all the like
the real
poets
art
were
community
still like there. And then they took me to some club in South of Market, and I was just like, oh, well, this is a real place. This is not just, fake tourist land, whatever. And then I went home, and then this would have been probably early in 84 or late 83 or early in 84, King Crimson did their final tour with this record called Three of a Perfect Pair.
Okay.
And a friend of mine and I, just on a whim, said, they're not stopping in, and I was sort of, at that time, I was completely like fascinated with Adrian Belew.
He was amazing.
And people, and Robert Fripp, and all these people. And so I was like, I want to go to this, and they're not coming to Colorado. But I see that they're going to be in San Francisco. They're going to be in Berkeley at the Greek Theater. Let's go. And I had never done something like that before. Like the Deadheads, I follow the band all over the country. I had never gone to another town, flown someplace to see
for a show.
For a show. But I said, I love San Francisco. All the times I visited, I love it. Let's just give ourselves a little vacation. And at that time, I was just making a living as a singer-songwriter, playing, doing some busking, but also just playing in clubs and restaurants and bars and ski resorts in the Denver metro area, and then out on the out further out to the ski resorts and places like that.
Sure.
And so we bought plane tickets, my friend and I, and we flew to San Francisco. We got ourselves the cheapest motel room we could get, and then we went to this concert with King Crimson, and then we just spent several days in San Francisco and just going to interesting places. We went to the Mabuhay Gardens, which was like the famous punk rock club in San Francisco. And we went to we just went all over the place. And while I was here, I started feeling like, I think I'm supposed to be here. This is where I think I'm supposed to be. And I also realized that the Bay Area had an experimental music scene. And at that time, Denver metro area, not so much,
Even still.
We got back to Colorado and I just said, you know what? I'm just going to go. And so I started, wrapping up all my affairs here. I gave notice of the apartment I lived in Boulder. I stayed with my sister for a month in Denver while saving all my money. I did what I did. I did a sort of a farewell concert. And then I headed for San Francisco. I packed my hippie bus with everything I owned and drove to San Francisco. And when I got here, I was very, very well rewarded for that decision, because I discovered that indeed there was this amazing contemporary music scene and performance art scene. San Francisco in the 80s was heaven for experimental music and performance art and all of this stuff. There were like dance people, contact improv. There were avant-garde open mic nights where people were coming and doing performance art and people collaborating with all kinds of different people, all kinds of interdisciplinary work, weird concert
Kind of sounds
series.
like what CBGB's was for a while.
It was just the best.
Wow.
There was actually this compound called Club 9, which was at 9th and Harrison, which is now where the Stud is. But it used to be called Club 9, and it was this big space, kind of warehousey nightclub space with several rooms. And there would be, on a given night, you might have Diamanda Galas playing in one room, and then some like avant-garde DJ in the other room. And then there'd be these performance art evenings where new music people from Mills College would come and put on shows with lots of, different people, some work being performed. And then it was next door to this like motel. It was attached to sort of an old motel that was no longer a motel. And the rooms in that motel used to be called the art motels. And they would just put installations. So you'd walk along that little catwalk that looks into all the picture windows of all the motel rooms. And inside each one was an installation. And so you would look in and there'd be like some strange things hanging and lighting and, and one time one of the art motels the installation was a Twister game. They basically put Twister on the floor and they left the door open.
Oh.
And then all the people from the club would just go in and be
doing
Twister. And you'd look in the window and the art was seeing the people play Twister. It was like, so it was just quite a scene. And there was this wonderful art gallery called New Langton Arts that used to present everybody, who was anybody in new music. And like David Van Tighem came and played a set, and there were, it was the first play I think I saw Phil Niblock there, and all these different electronic music people and experimental music people and text sound people, avant-garde sort of experimental theater people. It was just the best scene. It was the best moment. And then the punk rock clubs were still going strong. Mabuhay Gardens was still having stuff every night, and there was another punk rock club called the C&W Lounge. And so it was like, you would think that they would have country and western, but no, it was punk. But anyway, on and on.
Okay, so you're doing all this, and it sounds like your world is just expanding.
Yeah.
How are you paying for things? You still busking?
Well, at that time, so when I left Boulder, I was a full-time musician making my living completely playing music.
Just performing.
But when I moved to San Francisco, I was new here, and I was like coming here going, I'm just going to do nothing but experimental music. So I don't know, I'm sometimes very thankful at how naive I was, because who in their right mind would say, I'm going to go and I'm going to be a musician and that's what I'm going to do for a living. But I'm just going to play avant-garde experimental music. That's all I'm going to do. And I'll just live on that, you know.
I think the rent was a lot cheaper back then too.
It was. But when I moved here, I knew that I couldn't just jump right in and be making a living. So for the first several years, I had a day job. And so my first day job was on Fisherman's Wharf at a jewelry store at like this ridiculous sort of like tourist Disneyland like jewelry store that sold pearls out of the oyster.
We walked past a half a dozen of those.
Oh yeah, and you would have to kind of like a carnival barker. You'd have to get people, come on over, get your pearls out of the oyster. And then you sell, I think it was like $4.95 an oyster. And they get a pearl. And then it's like, oh, look at the beautiful pearl you got. Don't you think this would be better mounted on a gold ring? And then you would sell the jewelry, right? So I did that for like, I don't know, a part of a year.
Okay.
And then meanwhile, I was running around trying to get a job at least in music. And I was playing. I was immediately playing I was playing in coffee houses and at funny little, avant-garde, open mic nights and at these little gallery performance art festival gallery things and stuff like that. So the money was like really low, but I was getting some money from music pretty much right away. And then I was getting this day job. And then I got hired at Tower Records. And so then, which as you can imagine was like the beautiful minimum wage job. So I worked for 5 years at Tower Records. I worked from 85 until 90.
But what'd you learn in that job, even though it was minimum wage?
Oh, well, it was amazing because I was like, everybody who worked there was either musicians or people who love music. And obviously they're doing it because they want that. And so it was this great community of really interesting people. So I made some of my lifelong friends. And one friend that I made while I was there, one person who was working there while I was there is Ann Powers, who eventually she was a journalist on the side. So she was like working at Tower Records for minimum wage, like all of us, and she was writing for the San Francisco Weekly, and she used to do music reviews. Well, eventually, she wound up writing for, I think, Rolling Stone. For quite a long time, she was the rock critic for New York Times. And now she's doing NPR. Now she's like a music reviewer on NPR. So that was kind of cool. And there were a lot of people like that. There were a lot of people who went through Tower Records and went on to do like really interesting things. And so I was making really good friends and having a great time and, listening to him playing music all day long and getting in trouble because we were trying to play too weird of music, and all the patrons for the store would come in and they'd be like, you can't play half an hour of weird text sound poetry, in the store. You have to play Madonna. You have to play Peter Gabriel. You cannot be, you cannot play a weird Alvin Lucier record that's nothing but a long tone getting louder and louder. Right? Wow. But yeah, so it was great. And I went in the 5 years that I was there, I went from being a clerk in the tape department to being a supervisor. And then I think for a brief while I was like the manager of the tape department, and then I became a buyer on the record floor. And then I was the LP buyer. And this is really dating myself. When I started as the LP buyer, my section was like maybe almost half of the record floor. And by the time I left Tower, my section was half of an aisle because the CD buyer's space kept invading my space until finally I had nothing but like a row of cutouts. And that was my section. Oh. But anyways, so that was my, time at Tower. And what happened while I was at Tower was then I would run off and I would do all this music and as playing and performing my works for voice and electronics and being invited to do different things and getting artist residencies. And then I think in 90, I was given at the end of 89, I was given an artist residency. I was invited to do an artist residency at the Exploratorium, and for that they commissioned like a new work that I would make for the building, and that I was also invited to do another artist residency that was in Pennsylvania somewhere. And I said, oh my God, I think I'm back up to being able to just be a musician. And so I quit my day job and I just went to like doing music. And then since that time, I would say in the first 10 years of my sort of independence from doing day jobs to just being, having the lion's share of my living coming from making my art, during the first, say, 10 years of that, so from like 90 to 2000, I don't know, in there. I on and off and on would do like freelance stuff because I was so involved in computers and I used computers so much in my work. And I used computers for the art administration part of my work.
Sure.
And so I was a very early adopter. Like I had a Mac in 89 or something. I mean, like I had like, remember the little ones that look like a little bread box?
Yes, I do.
They were like an all-in-one little, so there was a Mac Classic and a Mac. I had a Mac Classic and I had a Mac Plus. I think the Mac Plus is earlier than the Mac Classic. I had a Mac Plus. It was the one that it didn't even have an internal hard drive. You had to put a floppy in, and then you had to load the operating system off of a floppy, and then you eject that floppy and put another floppy in to work on.
Yeah.
And so that was my first computer, but I had Macs since that time. And so, and I pretty early on started using like this FileMaker Pro database software to keep track of all of my audience and everything I was doing, and I just sort of became like really enmeshed in using the computer, and because of that, those were skills that gave me the opportunity to do some freelance work whenever I was short on money, and so I would teach people to use Macs. I would teach like Macs, Mac basics classes.
Were you teaching this to other creative types?
Like I would teach other artists, or would go like to nonprofit organizations, and I would help them make their database, for like keeping track of their donors, and I would do that, and I would teach classes. Like there was this nonprofit organization called Media Alliance.
Okay,
I think they still exist, but at that time a lot of what they were doing was trying to advocate for nonprofit organizations and people in the nonprofit sector by helping them with media. And so they had these computer classes. And so I used to teach a Mac Basics class at Media Alliance every once in a while. Or I would teach FileMaker Pro class and stuff like that. And so I was doing that. And then at some point I got a residency at the Lab Gallery through the California Arts Council. And this was great because it was like, there was a really good stipend for the residency. And it would be like, I think it was like a 9-month residency.
Wow.
And you would get, and so the proposal that I wrote was that I was going to teach sound work classes where I'd teach people about the physics of sound. I would teach people how to use Pro Tools. I would teach people how to compose experimental work, and I would sort of combine it into this class where it was both technical stuff and also, artistic teaching. And so I designed this course, and I taught that for 11 months through to different. And it was just like I would do 8-week courses, and so every I would do an 8-week course, and then a month later I'd do another 8-week course and stuff like that. And I did that sort of throughout my residency at the lab. and I was able to offer them for free because I was being paid by the California Arts Council.
Right. This episode is sponsored by Dorico, the future of scoring. And we want to feature real Dorico users so you can know that real composers out in the world today are using Dorico to make their careers happen.
My name is Ricardo Matzinhos, and I'm a horn player, I'm a teacher, and also a composer. As a composer, I love the way, for the first time, I can write music directly in Dorico. Because in other software, sometimes I feel that I cannot be really creative. For the first time on a software, I simply started to play on the piano without thinking about the key signature, about the metric. Let's simply play like if I was playing my own instrument. And then, of course, the way you can write the music and then adjust it, like make a specific rhythm longer, shorter, like if you were making notes on a piece of paper.
Would you recommend Dorico?
Yes, for sure. And there are some people starting to use Dorico in Portugal, most of them because of me. A few months ago, a friend asked me if I was interested in giving some Sibelius presentation. But I told him I don't use Sibelius anymore. I don't use Sibelius. Why? So what are you using? I told him about Dorico, and the Portuguese teachers need to make mandatory trainings every year. So I started to make these Dorico training sessions with teachers, some composers, some are not really composers, they just write exercises for their students. And actually, I convinced the major music publisher in Portugal to adopt Dorico. I really feel that we are just on the surface of this software. In the beginning, if you went to the Facebook Dorico page, there are a few people asking for things, how can I make this or that in Dorico? And there were some people complaining, oh, Dorico isn't able to do this or that. And now those voices are going away and more people are seeing the light of Dorico. So I'm really looking forward what Dorico 3 will bring us.
The kind folks at Dorico have set up a special web page so you can go and download a free 30-day trial copy of Dorico. So go and do that. I have been using the program and I'm absolutely in love with it. Go to dorico.com/TPC. You said something a minute ago that I just have to follow up on, because as you were becoming a Mac expert and learning all these tools, you said you were keeping track of your audience. And that's something I bring up a lot and I help other composers figure out is, well, who is your audience and all of that. But okay, so was that intuitive, or did someone help you say, like, okay, if you really want to build a career, you have to connect with people? How did that come about for you?
I think it's just because straight out of the gate as a 18-year-old, as soon as I graduated from high school and went to college, I started also performing professionally. And even when I was in music school, I was playing at nights, sometimes in clubs and coffee houses. And so I never had a manager or a booking agent or anything like that. Through most of my career, I did all of it myself. Mm-hmm. And so as such, I had to just learn how to do it. And so in the early days, we're talking in the 70s, we didn't have computers. And we didn't have, so our mailing lists were actual postal mailing lists.
Real mailing lists.
And so I just learned as a performing artist that I would have like a little clipboard at my gig, and I would say, if you like my work and you want to keep up with it, just sign this and put your address. And then I developed a mailing list. But at that time, it was like, at first, I swear to God, I was taking an Avery label template. And in those days, they still had that one that's like 3 across and 10 down.
Yeah, I bought many of those.
And I was taking a Xerox thing, and like I was handwriting in the form of those labels, the addresses, names and addresses of all those audience members that signed my thing. And then I would Xerox that onto the labels. And I would make postcards for my gigs. And the postcards were hand-drawn or Xerox, kind of like zine-like art that I made. And they were like on the Astro Bright cardstock from Kinko's. And I would do these funny little things, and it would list where I was playing that month, and then I would sticker the backs of them with my mailing list. So it started like that, and I did that and hand stamped them all. And then at some point, I started typing them into the Avery label thing. And then when I moved to San Francisco and I got into computers, that's when I got a hold of this FileMaker Pro software. And I figured out how to make my mailing list in there. And it just is something that I developed over years of having to basically in order to be a successful artist, unless you have an organization behind you, some kind of management that takes care of all this stuff for you. And even then, you still have to do a lot of it. But if you don't have that, you end up basically doing kind of 5 full-time jobs.
Tell me what these 5 are.
And one of them is audience, development, like, basically marketing, to your audience, keeping track of your audience and making the marketing materials and sending them out and blah, blah, blah. And then there's also publicist, which is different because that's dealing with the press. And, like trying to get members of the press, trying to invite them to your shows, get them to preview your show, get them to come and review your show, sending them promotional packages so that they're interested in putting you in the, listing you and so on and so forth. And then there's, the fundraising, the development part, like figuring out how to raise, write grants or raise money somehow for projects that you want to make,
including personal funds. Just like, are you saying all the money stuff is under category 3 fundraising, or are you just like?
Well, I'm just I mean, I haven't like defined it in these very
okay. So I'm getting
things,
too nitty gritty for you.
But there is that whole part of it is like coming up with the finances to.
Because you want to do something.
To do the things, because you can't. In the art world, you can't. The money doesn't come from like ticket sales and CD sales. It's like a lot of it comes from support that you have to get from donors or foundations, or whether they're public foundations or whether they're private. So there's that development part.
Yeah.
And then there's the administrative, like both financial and otherwise administrative part of like just doing the books, like keeping track of your expenses and your, where the money is going, how to make sure the taxes are going to be able to be prepared, taking care of like contracts and filling out forms. Every single one of these frickin' gigs that I do has with it, you have to go on our website and you have to fill out a vendor form. You have to become a vendor, and you have to, we need you to send a W-9, but it can't be the normal W-9. We have our own internal W-9 that's different from the other ones. You need to fill that out. And we also need you to fill out this form that promises that you won't molest the students at the university or whatever. It's like,
right?
Every gig you have, there's like, and then here's the contract. You have to fill out the formal contract and agree to that. And then you need to send us, your bio, your current bio and photographs, and we want you to write an artist statement about the piece that you'll be doing at our, So it's like every gig involves like hours of work of
Doesn't
just,
it?
You've already got the gig and you still have to do all this other, So there's all of that work, and then the making of the art. That also, that's another job.
And then if you get a W-2 from one of these gigs, we're usually 1099 employees, right?
Exactly.
But if you do and you're out of state, then you have to file income taxes in that state.
I mean,
and
it's like craziness, and it's like, and then you add the overseas part. Oh my God.
Right.
They're like, we need your VAT number, and we need you to send us a statement that proves that you're a resident of where you live. But it can't just be you writing a statement and having it notarized. You have to get this very specific government form that can only be obtained from some strange government office that you've never heard of.
And they're only open like 2 hours a day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know. It's like,
okay, so here's the 5 things that you said. Let me see if I got it right.
Yeah.
Audience development, PR, fundraising, admin, and these categories blur a little bit.
Right.
And then making the
and
art.
making the art. Which should be like the number one part that's like 100% or at least 80% of what you're doing, but sadly, no.
Well, in my experience, I mean, we want that to be the number one thing, but what I found for me is if I don't have the fundraising and the admin in place, I can't make the art. Mm-hmm. And then what is the art? And this, I kind of feel like you have to connect with an audience. Mm-hmm. So I can make what I want to make. Yeah. But if I want to move people, if I want to affect somebody, then I also have to have these other pieces in place. Mm-hmm. So it makes sense that you listed that last. Mm-hmm. Even though we want it to be first.
Exactly. Well, because
it's not like it's the least important thing.
You can't get to it without the other things.
Right.
You know?
Okay.
And so, so it's been intense. And so it's through having to do all of that and having to, on my own, have learned what all of that is and how to do it.
Right.
That's how I got to the point where I became a little bit of an expert almost on this because I was doing it myself. But I will say this, that for about 4 years or so in the 2000s, from the mid 2000s to the late 2000s, the naughties, the aughties.
The aughts, yeah.
I worked with a booking agent out of Brooklyn named Sue Bernstein. And she helped me a lot, but she was also only interested in booking. She did not want to take on my entire booking load, which is, in order to make a living as an artist, I do a wide range of gigs, and they range from little solo concerts in small galleries or performance galleries or art galleries, that it's just me and voice and electronics and a little concert setting, and the fees are generally not that high for it, but it's some, depending on where I go, I get something. To like large scale, full evening performance works that require multiple channels of projected video and a set design and a lighting design. And I usually, to do those shows, I usually have to travel with a crew of like at least one sound and one light person. Like one of the shows I did, I would bring a lighting designer and a video tech, and those shows have much higher fees, and they're much more, the budget for them is much larger. And then there's everything in between those. And she was really only interested in the big things because that's where her 18% would be a nice, she'd feel like it was worth her while to execute those contracts and get like whatever her chunk was. And so even when I was working with her, I was still doing most of this work. It was just those few pieces that she was booking.
Sure.
And she referred to herself as my manager, but she wasn't really my manager. She was a booking agent for a certain part of my repertoire. And so, so I got a lot from working with her. One of the things I got from working with her was that she booked me into larger venues and more prestigious series. Like that was when I started being booked on series that would be like, like the major arts, like from in whatever town it would be, like their big performing arts series, like here it would be like Cal Performances or San Francisco performances, and then, so there's in every town they have things like that. And so she got me into these venues that I would have never gotten myself into without, I had no idea even how to approach those presenters. And the only kind of work I could get that I could show in those places are the more large scale works that are good on a big proscenium stage, So she sort of pushed me over the brink into the place where I could get those bookings for those things. And I also learned from her how that has to be done, because these people who do this for you, they don't just do it in a vacuum. You have to be intimately involved, because for every piece that you're touring, they need to make a budget for like, what's the budget for this whole project? Like, what do you have? So how many people are traveling? And so all those plane fares, and the lodging for all those people for however many nights you need to be at that place. And then the per diem for each of I had to pay a per diem to the lighting designer and
sure.
So all these different people so then there was all of that. And then, the cost of then what the artist fee would be to me, and what part of that needed to be left over after all the other stuff got paid out. And what percentage of that had to go to the person who's doing this booking, so that I had to it had to be bumped up enough so that once she's taken her percentage out, I still have a decent fee.
Right.
What kind of fee you can ask for that kind of thing. And then the cost of like shipping the set elements and, all of these things I had to learn. And then that you have to put a contingency in there for like, what if something goes wrong? So you have to add some more money that's not for any particular thing in case something ends up being more expensive than it was supposed to be. And, and so I learned all of that from working with her. And by the time I stopped working with her, and what happened with her was that she booked me for maybe about 4 years. And it was because I had one piece that she wanted to focus on. And so for a couple of years, she just booked just that piece. Mm-hmm. But then she kind of ran out of venues that wanted that piece. And so she said, do you have another one? And so I didn't have another large scale work that was ready to be tourable yet. So I invented one that was more of like an evening of my works for voice and electronics, but sort of compiled into a bigger sort of a seamless work that would have projected images. And, I made it a little bit more, just a little bit more dramatic, like something that could go on a large stage and have a good lighting design and so on and so forth.
But it feels like you have also the elements from your old busking career. Like if you're going to take some of your other pieces and put it together, and like an evening of
just make
Pamela
an evening of. So I took an evening of short works, built material to segue from one to the other, and built like visual material that would go that I pulled from my large scale works. That I could put into it, and sort of sculptural elements that could be on the stage and lit and so on and so forth. So I came up with a show like that. And then she booked that for a while until she kind of ran out of venues to book that for. And then we sort of, in a very amicable way, terminated our agreement to work together. But so that all happened over about 4 or 5 years. And during that time, I think the level of my career, my visibility, did bump up to a level where then I was able to start booking those larger works myself, because I now knew how, and I had some of the contacts and so on.
And you're not eating 18%.
Exactly. And so, and for example, like one of the places that I took the work was to the Kitchen in New York. So then the curator at the Kitchen came back to me a few years later and said, what do you have now? We'd like to have you again. And I was like, yay. So I was able to kind of go back to some of these places and book other things. And I also like had a much clearer idea of how to approach doing that and what I needed to, sustain in order to do it. And so that was a useful period, even though it didn't last forever, and I didn't end up with having permanent representation. What I really want and need and have been wanting and trying to get for a long time is an artist representative who's devoted to my career in a holistic way and will do a lot of this work that
The business
those
stuff.
things that so that I can do number 5 and,
Yes.
and only have to do parts of numbers 1 through 4. But at this point, I'm still almost 100%.
Yeah.
And sometimes I hire a studio assistant and they can help me with parts of this.
Right.
But it's really hard there's a lot of it that's hard to have somebody, it's harder to train somebody else to do it than it is to just do it.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so I'm totally fascinated by this. Can we start with how you calculate the budget stuff? Because are you aiming for a particular profit number, or is it a percentage? Like, as you're figuring this all out, and at the end of the day, after you've paid your people and you've paid your fees and expenses, are you trying to make a certain number, or how do you think about it?
It's still confusing to me, even because every gig differs so much. I mean, the amount that I end up taking home as my fee after all the expenses are covered varies so crazily wildly. I mean, it just, it's boggling. So, I mean, I think in the end, and this is what I wanted to say about the making the art part of this. To me, the most important thing about this is the making of the art.
Sure.
And just as I am not willing to alter what I'm doing in my art to make it more accessible or make it more, make it more popular or whatever, it's like I have always felt like you make good work that you believe in and that you think is good, and it will find its audience, hopefully, and that's kind of what I've always gone by. I have never changed the actual content or quality or bent of what it is that I'm doing, hoping to get a bigger audience or to please more people or have it be
good.
I don't believe in doing that. I go the other way. It's like I am completely willing to bend over backwards to spin it a certain way in what's written about it to interest different people in it.
Sure.
But the art itself, I am not touching.
Yeah.
I am not gonna. I will improve on it and change it according to how well I feel it went. Like if I do a piece and I say, it could have been stronger in this way, that way, or the other way. I might work on the piece or change it for those reasons, but those are artistic reasons, not because, if I change it in this way, I can pull in the such and such crowd. If I add more beats, I can get the, this crowd.
The EDM crowd.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like I won't do that, but I will. I'm constantly working on trying to make the work better. So that I think it's better.
Right.
And the same thing is true of, in a weird way, of this whole money issue. Since the goal is to make the work and to get the work out there, that means I'm willing for a pretty broad range of money.
Yeah.
To do it if I can make it possible. And I also feel like things even out. I'm doing some things that are practically for free, but on the other hand, I'll have another really good gig that month that's actually paying me an incredibly generous fee. Or I have a commission from some ensemble that's paying really well. So then I can do a performance and not get paid that well, but I get to do this great performance at this really important place or this really special place or it's a situation. So it all balances out that way. So no, I don't have a figure it has to be this exact amount of money. I mean, I have, ballparks around which that I hope to get, but I'm not, it's like the bottom line is not, usually the bottom line isn't the bottom line.
It's not for me either. Yeah.
And so, but in order to figure out whether something's feasible or not, I have to sometimes work out how, for example, there's things I can go and do, and I say, if I'm going to go do this piece, I really can't do this piece without bringing 2 people. So there has to be enough money to bring those people and pay them and pay for their lodging and pay my lodging and you know, and the time that we're going to spend in that, you know. So like when I went to, when I took this piece, for example, to the what is it called? WPA, the Washington Performing Arts Society or whatever, in DC. It was a piece that I needed to have a lighting person and a sound person with me. And those two technicians, and the sound person had to be also able to run the video because I couldn't afford 3 people for that show. So there had to be enough money in the budget that would cover through all 3 of our flights and all 3 of our hotel rooms for the period that we were there. And they also had to give us enough time in that theater to mount the piece.
Right.
So we needed a couple of days in the theater in advance of the actual opening of the show.
But you have already in your mind, at least, like you said, kind of an ideal number, probably based on the size of the piece. Like, okay, this is really to make it feasible. Because if they say, well, we can't make that that number, then you'd have to turn around and say, well, I can't do that piece.
Right, yeah. Yeah, exactly. I would say if you don't have that much money, then what you can do is you can pay me the money that you do have as my fee and my lodging, and I'll come and just do a solo concert.
Right.
And I can have a single channel of video. I can control that from the stage myself, work with your sound engineer. You know, so I can make adjustments to what it is that I'm doing if they can't afford the big piece.
Sure.
You know, but it was really useful to me to work with her to learn how to make that budget for that big piece. And then, of course, there does have to be an artist fee for me on top of all of that. And so, but that artist fee itself does tend to vary a lot. And what I learned in the early days is I had to train myself to not, I think a lot of artists have this bad habit of like, you really want to do the work, so you do it, and your budget is a certain amount, but you only, the grant you get or whatever is only some percentage of that. So then you end up like going into credit card debt, paying for the rest of it because you want to make the work.
Got to make work.
And then you do it. And then it's like, now you're in debt. And so I've had to really learn like, no, you've got to pare the piece back. You can't do as big of a production as you were going to do if you're paying out of your own pocket, because then you're going to end up in debt, and then you're going to end up having to be bankrupt and blah, blah, blah.
Or you go back to the day job.
Yeah, exactly. So
speaking of debt, I know several people who listen to this show they would love to do experimental music like you, build a career around it. And they've come out of college or master's degrees or doctorate degrees, and now they have many, many thousands of dollars in debt. Knowing what you know now about your career, and you've been doing this for 30 years, what would you do it again? Or what would you say to these people?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I don't feel that I'm definitely a lifer. I'm one of those people that I was just made to do this. And and the advice I always give to people is like, only do this if you're meant to do it. If this is the thing you need to do, only do this if you need to do it. Right. If you're just like, oh, that might be fun, then no, just do it as a hobby and play with it. But, you know, if you're going to devote your life to this, it has to be because you're passionate about it. Because it's not like going into one of those careers where it's like, oh, you're guaranteed to just make like money up to your ears from doing this, and
your employees matching your retirement account like it doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's like, you know, it's you work as hard as anybody at any job. You work that hard and harder. And if you're lucky, if you play your cards right and if things go right for you, then you might actually also get compensated very well for that. But, you know, it's not easy. It's never easy. And so it's like, that's, you know, my advice is like, do this if it's the thing that you're supposed to be doing, you know.
But when you started this journey for yourself, and I'm making an assumption here, but based on the story you've told, you weren't straddled with a student loan debt.
No, I did have student loans, but I paid them off pretty quickly. I paid my student loans off as a musician in San Francisco. I mean, in Boulder, Colorado. I think my student loans were paid off by the time I moved to San Francisco.
That's fantastic.
And it's because at that time, and Boulder was not a cheap place to live, but
Still isn't.
but by today's standards, it was, you know, it was not bad. Like the apartments that I had there, the rent I had to pay on those apartments, and the fact that I had nothing but my rent and the student loan payment. Those are the two things I had to pay. And so I was able to get by, and I was single, so I didn't have like a family that I had to pay for or anything like that. And I just, you know, managed as a musician to make the money that I needed to make. So when I moved to San Francisco, I came here without debt. I also came here without money. I had like almost not a, you know, I had like some ridiculously low amount of money to my name when I came here. And I was basically starting from scratch. Like I had to borrow money, I think, from my sister for first and last, or from my mother or something for first and last rent deposit.
Sure.
And I lived in San Francisco for a month or a month and a half, sleeping on somebody's couch, a friend of mine's couch, while I was while I was finding a place and getting together the money for it. And then, you know, I went from there. But yeah, it's, you know.
You made it work.
Yeah. And then I just, but I've already forgotten the question.
So it was, I have this tendency to stack questions. It's terrible, but it's two parts.
Mm-hmm.
The first is kind of what advice would you give to someone who's doing it now because you did this so long ago,
right?
And everything's changed. I mean, the economy's changed, the art scene has changed, school has changed, but then there was also the question about the debt.
Yeah.
So I think you kind of hit it all, unless you have anything else to add to it.
Well, I did. I would say that I then accrued a bunch of debt later after I was really, I mean, when I first was living here, I didn't have debt and I was doing really just fine, even working at Tower Records for like, I mean, honestly, I think I started there at $3.75 an hour. I think that was my starting. And I think when I left there, when I was a manager and a buyer, I think I was making $7 an hour.
Wow.
But these are 1990s dollars. But still, I was able to actually live on that. I mean, you also like share a flat with 5 people in the Mission, back when the Mission was a cheap place to live. I mean, not cheap by the world standards, but by San Francisco standards, that was one of the inexpensive neighborhoods. The Mission District used to be like where all the artists and Hispanic families lived. And it was among the cheaper rents in the city was that neighborhood. Now that neighborhood is like, you have to be rich to live there. I mean, seriously rich. But then after I started to really get deep into my career as a composer performer, making art in San Francisco and making my living off of it, I started to do foolish things like have a production at Theater Artaud that had a $60,000 budget and only raising $40,000 from whatever grants that I got.
So you put yourself on the hook.
You know, start paying my lighting designer out of credit cards and, paying people, in the end, when all the people come back to roost and say, oh, you owe this money to the lighting designer and there are these electricians and these carpenters that you have to pay. And then all of a sudden you're like, I don't have any money left. I guess I'll just take money out from one of my credit cards. And I did that a few too many times and I got myself in a little bit of trouble for a while that way. So I feel like I've learned my lesson on that now, and I'm not doing that anymore. Like now I'm like really, once I know what my budget is, I'm having to like, okay, then you need to pare the project back to what fits in that budget. You can't just go ahead and do it anyway,
And that's all under the big picture of the business of writing music, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. What I think are the two key things that I always tell people to do is make work and go see other people's work.
Yeah.
Don't just lock yourself up in your studio and only listen to your own thing and work on your own thing and have blinders on. Go out into the community and support that community that you're hoping is going to support you, and by seeing people's work and being there at concerts, but also at the same time, you're getting inspiration for making work by seeing other people's work. And it might be inspiration that's like, oh my God, this is so exciting. I want to go home and make something that moves people in that same way. Or, oh, this was terrible. I'm going to go make something that's much better than that. You just need to have some stimulus out that's coming from externally and coming from, and also just a presence in the community, because this contemporary music, experimental music, the art world, it's a community, and it makes a difference for you to have a presence there. And I mean, I go to everything, even now, like when I'm so overwhelmed and I have so much going on that sometimes I can barely get my head above water and find time. I still find time to go see other work, because to me that's important. That's the food, and so I do that. If I can't do anything else, I still do that. And so I feel like people, what they need to do is go see other people's work and make their own work. And then the other things have to just fall in place. And those things are hard work, and you're going to have to do that hard work. But it's kind of pointless to do that hard work. Those things kind of have no meaning without the art. Without the art, So
I agree.
And the going and seeing other people's work part is like it's really padded with a lot of good side effects, because it's like you get to see that work and be inspired by it, but you're also meeting people, and those people are seeing you at everything and therefore remembering you. So when they're curating, you're in their mind. I have some friends who are really, really good composers and really make interesting work, but they can't find it in themselves to go out much and to do things much and to go places. And then they sort of like pine about, why is nobody inviting me? Why am I not on that series? And I'm like, they don't remember you exist. You need to like be present with people in order for them to remember that you exist, Right. And so that's one little thing right there. So just, I don't know, be present in the community, I guess, is maybe one thing. If they're not doing that already, that's one thing that they could start doing right away, is, be present.
I think that's lovely advice. And one thing that I often bring up in the podcast is that there's a lot of composers all across the world, but we think, or some people have this idea that you have to be in one of these major coastal cities. There is something happening where you live. I have a friend who's been on the podcast. He's in the middle of nowhere in Upper Michigan. Yeah. And he was moved there from Philly to be with his wife. Yeah. And he's found he actually has tons of opportunity if you look for it. If you build community, if you show up, if you go to the concerts, if you build relationships.
Yeah. And also it's a web. This community, like the contemporary music world or the experimental music world or whatever you're wanting to call it, or whatever part of it that you're feeling connected with, is a big web that's global. And I always used to joke that new music concerts, only 30 people come to new music concerts, but it's the same 30 people. It doesn't matter whether you're in Tokyo or in New York or in Denver, Colorado, or wherever you go. And it's the same people, and they all know each other, and they're all at each other's concerts, and they're all, and it's like, it's kind of, I kind of say it as a joke, but it's kind of true. And it's like you're queued up at go see something in Montreal, and you turn around and Carl Stone is standing behind you in line, or whatever. It's like we're all like this community, and we're kind of supporting each other and getting inspired by each other and going and seeing each other's work, no matter where we are and where we go. And there's little pockets of it everywhere, not just in New York City and, San Francisco and Los Angeles and, whatever, Chicago or whatever, places that people think that it's only happening.
That's lovely. I just yeah, you're right. 100% right. Well, why don't we just wrap it up right there?
Yeah.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This episode of the Portfolio Composer has been supported by Dorico, the music notation software from Steinberg. Whether you're a composer or arranger, a teacher or student, working in music engraving and publishing, or working in producing music for media such as film, TV, and games, Dorico is the tool for you. Dorico comes in two versions, Dorico Pro for professionals and Dorico Elements, providing the perfect introduction to the world of scoring. Whichever version you choose, you'll be using software packed full of smart features that produces beautiful results completely automatically, allowing you to get music on the stand more quickly than with any other software. You can bring music into Dorico from your existing software using Music XML or MIDI, and you can try Dorico out completely free of charge for 30 days by downloading a trial version from dorico.com/TPC. Try it today.